Oh, right. Yeah, this popped up. Now, we do this channel anyway, Disturban, um, for scary, like, murder stories. But yeah, this popped up of Disturbing doing a video on Nick Fuentes getting shot. This crazy to me that like only heard about him a couple of days ago. Well, maybe a week ago. But I went on a bit of a binge. I mean, it's hard to go on a binge. Although someone said in comments that he's on Rumble, so I might check out on Rumble. Because something he did say that was crazy to me was that, like, I disagree with him a lot on the Israel Palestine thing. But one thing he did say in the Israel Palestine is that Israel is the number one beneficiary of American aid. That's crazy to me. In our country, that it's Africa and India. As someone who's British, English, whatever, that doesn't bother me really. Like, maybe there are English people that think, oh, we could spend that money in our country, but when you hear the British aid, the top two ones is India and Africa. I'm cool with that. If it was Israel, I'll be livid. I thought Israel was why are you why and that is very telling us why is America giving so much money to Israel. It's, that is crazy. Although I disagree with him on certain things, that's crazy. But yeah, um, this is him getting shot. The story of him getting shot. I mean, people really don't like him, and it's kind of concerning because, like I say, a couple of people have just come in the comments and said you look like Nick Fuentes, which does make me think. I wonder if they think, why is Nick Fuentes reacting to Queen, and clicked on the video and realised I'm not him. But what if I get shot or punched or something? I've had it numerous times. People say you look like Nick Fuentes. What if I'm just walking down the road and someone beats me up because of some crazy shit Nick Fuentes said? But anyway, yeah, let's him getting shot. Let's go.
This case takes place in the USA in the year 2024. On a December night, multiple Illinois communities were shattered by one man, sparked by something that happened years before. This is the story of a terrifying rampage that destroyed a family and ended in an attempt on a political streamer's life. Mahomet is a small close-knit village in Illinois. In this peaceful area, the Mason family was well known and beloved. Janice Mason was a 61-year-old woman who had lived in the neighborhood for years, raising her two children, 26-year-old Sarah Mason and 23-year-old Caleb Mason. Neighbors described Janice as an amazing person. She was loved and respected. The area in which the family lived was known to be somewhat quiet and unremarkable. It was a regular area where not much happened. But on the night of the 18th of December 2024, an unimaginable tragedy struck that house. At 9:41 p.m., the police were called to the Mason residence after reports of gunfire. Locals had heard the commotion. Terrified, they waited for the authorities to arrive, peering out of their curtains. Officers quickly arrived at the scene. They approached the home and found all three members of the Mason family. They had all been shot and were found gravely wounded in the garage and driveway of their home. Sarah Mason was pronounced dead at the scene from her injuries, but her mother Janice and brother Caleb were rushed to hospital. Although despite emergency treatment, both died shortly after 10 p.m. that night. As word spread, friends and neighbours gathered near the Mason home, which was cordoned off with police tape. Immediately, the police began trying to find who was responsible. At first they assumed that this was some kind of home invasion gone horribly wrong, an armed burglary that ended in tragedy. But as the police began their investigation, it quickly became clear that this was not a random attack. The suspect was identified almost immediately, and in fact was already located by law enforcement within hours of these murders. The man responsible was John Lyons, a 24-year-old man from Westchester, Illinois. John was no stranger to the Mason family. It soon emerged that John had a long-standing grudge against Caleb. The two had been roommates in college in 2022, but their relationship ended in violence. In June of that year, John alleged that Caleb brutally beat and choked him during an argument, knocking John unconscious. Criminal charges were not filed against Caleb after the fight. a decision that left John furious. Feeling denied of justice, John took matters into his own hands, by filing a civil lawsuit against Caleb for assault and battery, seeking $50,000 in damages. However, the legal battle just dragged on and on. John's parents later told the police that in 2022, their son became depressed and withdrawn following the attack. They grew worried about his well-being, and so he eventually moved back in with his parents, but he struggled to hold his life together, growing increasingly angry. By late 2024, John's troubles were mounting. He had recently quit his job and was also facing an unrelated criminal charge for a hit-and-run that he was involved in. In fact, John was scheduled to appear in court on the following morning of the 19th of December 2024 in relation to this hit-and-run case. Friends and family noticed John's downward spiral. His own father grew concerned enough to monitor his son's whereabouts on the day of these killings. On the 18th of December, John had lied to his parents about where he was going, and at some point during the day, they discovered that he had driven towards central Illinois, where the Mason family lived. Alarmed, John's parents contacted the police that evening when they realized that he wasn't coming home as he promised. But by then, it was too late. John had already killed Caleb along with his mother and his sister. John had arrived in that town in the afternoon on the 18th of December, intent on finding Caleb. According to police reports, John showed up at the Mason home 5 hours before the murders. At around late afternoon, he knocked on the door. A male roommate was staying with the family at the time, and he answered the door. John introduced himself only as Jack, and he asked when Caleb would be home. This roommate informed John that Caleb wouldn't be back for a few hours. John left, at least for the moment, but he didn't go far. He lingered in the area, waiting. The roommate found this to be rather suspicious. Caleb really wasn't home. He was out working, but he would be home soon. The roommate found John's demeanour so strange that he later texted Caleb's sister, Sarah, informing her about the odd encounter with this mysterious visitor. At this time, neither Sarah or her mother Janice were home either. By early evening, Sarah was making her way home. When she got back, she encountered John loitering nearby. John approached Sarah looking for her brother, but she explained to him that Caleb wouldn't be home for a few more hours. John then walked away, but he didn't leave the neighbourhood. He parked his car down the street and waited in silence, watching the house for any signs of Caleb. At around 9:10 p.m, Janice returned home. The family's roommate later recalled that Janice seemed pretty disturbed by John's presence earlier that day. She explained to this roommate that the family was at odds with John over the pending lawsuit. And then Sarah made a chilling post on social media at 9:22 p.m. She wrote about the man outside her house. She wrote, "Trying not to be a scared suburban white woman about the dude waiting outside of my house. He left, but probably will be back." Less than 20 minutes later after Sarah posted this, the family's worst fears came true. By 9:30, Caleb was home. Just 10 minutes later, at 9:40 p.m, gunshots rang out in the driveway. The male roommate was in the basement at the time when he heard the gunfire above. He rushed upstairs and stumbled upon a horrific sight. Janice, Sarah, and Caleb were all lying wounded, bleeding from gunshot wounds near the house. By the time the police arrived, John had fled. Investigators at the scene quickly identified John as the main suspect. The male roommate was able to assist in this, telling the police that the family was scared of him when he came by the house earlier. The police alerted other law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout. An armed madman was on the loose. It wouldn't take long. Barely 2 hours later, John would surface in another suburban neighborhood in Chicago. He had turned his sights on a man named Nick Fuentes. At around 11:30 p.m. on that very same night, John's car pulled up on a residential suburb of Chicago. He had driven roughly 150 miles north from the scene of the triple homicide. Here, in this suburb, lived Nicholas Fuentes, a 26-year-old political commentator and online streamer. Nick's address had just recently been leaked on social media in the wake of a controversial post he made. It appears John knew exactly who he was looking for. Some of you may be wondering, who is Nick Fuentes? Nick is somewhat of a notorious figure in online politics, banned on most platforms. In late 2022, he made headlines for attending a private dinner with Trump and Kanye West. And just weeks before John turned up at his home, Nick had posted a tweet following the 2024 election, in which he wrote, "Your body, my choice, forever." This tweet angered a great number of people, and in retaliation, his home address was doxed online. From this point onwards, Nick had endured harassment at his doorstep, including an incident where he was charged with pepper spraying a 57-year-old woman who came to his home to confront him. Hundreds of people ended up going to Nick's home to harass him, but eventually it did simmer down. He said for the most part it was relatively harmless, just people throwing eggs at his door and ringing his doorbell. But when John turned up, things were very different. When John arrived, Nick was in the middle of a live stream, when all of a sudden, his doorbell rang. Security footage later obtained by the police and shared publicly by Nick shows John on Nick's porch at around 11:30 p.m. He was wearing a white motorcycle helmet and dark clothing. In one hand, he held a pistol, and in the other was a
Hold on. Dark clothing? He's got, Rupert the Bear's trousers on. That's not dark clothing if you're going to go and do something. You wear all black. Everyone knows that. Big L's got a song. All black.
Loading crossbow. The footage caught John trying the door handle and pounding on the door. He shouted, "You're Nick,"
And he's got a red
as he attempted to gain entry round the back and the front of the property. Inside, Nick heard the commotion. Of course, he just assumed it was more people turning up to annoy him, but he was wrong. As he's live streaming, Nick reaches for his phone. He opens up the Ring camera app and takes a look just so he can see what's going on outside. It was at that moment that he saw John standing there with a gun. Upon seeing this, Nick ended the live stream, not telling his viewers what was going on. His producer then spoke with Nick and told him not to worry. He had called the police, and they were already outside and were dealing with the matter. Upon getting the call, multiple squad cars had raced to the scene. The officers responding saw John immediately at Nick's house. Upon seeing the police, John took off running before they could apprehend him. A foot chase then ensued through the streets. John was still wearing the motorcycle helmet as he ran through the yards and alleyways. As he was running, he dumped his backpack between some houses. Later, investigators recovered this backpack and discovered it contained his crossbow and several flammable liquids. The bag suggested that John had come prepared for a prolonged and violent attack, possibly even planning arson or an explosion. Next, John forced his way into a house on a neighbouring block, looking for a place to hide, or perhaps even take a hostage. The house he had gone into belonged to a man named Scott. Upon hearing his house being broken into, Scott ran downstairs to see what was going on. As Scott reached the bottom of the stairs, he came face to face with John. John was standing in his hallway with a gun in his hand. In that split second, John raised the gun. He fired at Scott, but thankfully the bullet missed. However, Scott also had 2 dogs. Scott's 2 dogs bravely tried to defend their owner, and they charged towards John. But John fired 2 shots, killing both of the dogs, named Bear and Missy. Scott managed to run upstairs and barricade himself on the 2nd floor. Meanwhile, John ran back out into the street. By now, the police had created a perimeter. John emerged from the house into a backyard and alleyway, where the police attempted to corner him. They demanded that he surrender at once, but John refused to listen. Instead, he raised his pistol and opened fire on the police. 1 bullet managed to shatter the window of a police cruiser, just narrowly missing an officer. The police had no choice but to return fire. Nick would later recall hearing gunshots in the neighbourhood. Within seconds, John was struck by a police bullet. He collapsed to the ground, A fatal gunshot wound to his head ended the rampage. After John was shot, the paramedics were called, but there was nothing that could be done for him. He was pronounced dead shortly after. Miraculously, no officers were injured in the final shootout, but in the span of a few hours, John had killed 3 people, tried to kill another, and shot 2 beloved family pets. News of the killer spread quickly. Nick had shared what happened on his social media, and the story went viral given his notoriety online. Many people knew that Nick was nearly killed, but sadly people didn't know the full story, and it seems like many people still don't. But this left everyone wondering, why? What could drive someone to commit such heinous acts of violence? Investigators quickly learned about John's history with Caleb. They pulled court documents showing the pending lawsuit against him, which solidified the motive. This was a targeted act of revenge, and not a random crime. In the end, investigators determined that John had acted alone, driven by a personal grudge. But there was still the question, why did he try and kill Nick? Why would someone with a personal vendetta against an old roommate suddenly go and try and kill someone so random? When questioned, John's parents were reportedly as baffled as anyone about their son's attempt to confront Nick. Police records don't provide any indication as to why he targeted Nick, aside from the fact that his apartment had become a magnet for his critics once his location was exposed online. Some have speculated.
It's obvious why, and he explains what he said to Candice Owens in that thing, of why he doesn't want to get married and have kids. He said in that, people doxing my thing. Now I know what he was talking about. Someone turned up to his house to shoot him. But it's obvious why. The guy's just nuts. Probably a woke, far left person. And someone doxed Nick Fuentes, so he went to his house and was going to shoot him. Like, I don't see it as much of a mystery as to why they would. Nick Fuentes, I've only known him for a very short space of time, but he says very controversial things, very harshly. It's understandable. Well, it's not understandable why someone would want to shoot him, but in the current climate we live in, it's not a. Do you know what I mean? It's not a mystery.
Killing Nick would have made John infamous. Perhaps in his depressed, delusional state, he wanted to go out with a bang, hence targeting one of the most polarizing people in American politics. As far as investigators can tell, there was and is no personal known connection between the 2 men, and what's even stranger, John wasn't publicly associated with any political movements. However, investigators did find that John had legally purchased a 9mm handgun used in the crimes. This indicates that the attack was premeditated to some degree. He armed himself well in advance. His parents told the police they had no idea that he owned a gun. They had noticed him acting secretive that day, but nothing could have prepared them for what was to come. In fact, just minutes before John arrived,
he probably thought in his head that if I kill a family and then go to Nick Fuentes, pretty much the whole of the left wing will support me, because technically I just shot Hitler. That's what they would think. That might even be his thing. That if I go and shoot Nick Fuentes, 100%, a certain demographic of the population will completely ignore the fact I murdered a family and just love the fact that I shot Nick Fuentes and killed him.
Nick's house, he had sent a message to his parents saying, "I'll be home soon." That was around 11:25 p.m. When they stopped hearing from him, John's worried parents actually reported him missing to the police, perhaps hoping to intervene before anything bad happened. But by this point, he was already dead, and a mass killer. Police and others have speculated that John intended on killing many more people that night. The flammable liquid accelerants in his bag suggested that he planned for something much bigger. Also, the crossbow was a silent weapon to avoid noise. It's possible that he intended to kill Nick quietly and then kill others, but thankfully, he never got the chance to continue. Investigators also believe it's possible that he rang Nick's doorbell rather than shooting through the door because he wanted to confront him face to face, or even take him captive. Although these are just speculative details, it paints a picture of a man who had truly set out on a path of extreme violence. Following the attack, Nick publicly thanked God and the police for his survival. He shared the surveillance video clip of John on the porch and wrote, "An armed killer made an attempt on my life at my home. My home was recently doxed on this platform. I'm grateful to God that I am still alive today. While heartbreaking, it could have been so unimaginably worse. Doxing is not a game." Following the attack, Nick moved away from the area. He said he was willing to uproot his life and relocate, as according to him, it would be irresponsible to expect his neighbours with young families to share that burden of potential danger. Meanwhile, locals who lived near Nick expressed relief that no bystanders were killed in the shootout. Many didn't even know who Nick was until this incident. In the wake of the attack, many mourned the deaths of the Mason family. Sarah Mason, the 26-year-old daughter, had a close circle of friends who were devastated by her death. They described her as a witty, intelligent, and caring individual. Caleb's best friend from high school, Bryson, remembered him as someone who was always there for you. The two had stayed close after graduating and had coffee just weeks before the tragedy. He later said in an interview, "I don't know how to process this. We were supposed to grow old together, and now he's gone. Just like that." A memorial was held for the family, with many locals gathering to mourn and show support. Neighbours described the loss of the Masons as heartbreaking and unfathomable. Several neighbours spoke of the kindness Janice had showed them throughout the years, especially as she had been active in the local church and various community events. At the same time, John's family was left in a state of shock and sorrow. His parents, who had tried to steer him away from trouble, were now faced with the reality that their son was now a mass killer. They thanked the officers who intervened. There was no defending what John had done. Because John was killed, there will be no trial. In a legal sense, the case is closed. Yet for those who knew the victims, questions linger about how a college argument led to a triple homicide. Some have pointed to mental health, John's depression, and his erratic behaviour. They are left wondering if more intervention and support after the 2022 fight could have prevented this from happening. We will never fully know just why John did what he did. All of those answers died with him.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. But you see what he was saying. The fact that Candice Owens turned around and said to him, "You're selfish," after he said that I don't want a family because of the life I live. I'm a controversial figure. I have people doxing me. I have people coming to my house. And she just turned around and said, "You're selfish for that." That's made what I mean. Candice Owens looked terrible in that whole thing. She just looked completely like a. It was like watching how people argue with her. It was crazy, but that was her lowest point in that interview. I think when she said, "You're you're selfish," and I triggered you, and but anyway, yeah. I mean, the girl writing on the thing, "I don't want to be like a suburban white person because I'm scared about some guy outside my house." This is the thing. This again a Patrice O'Neill joke, isn't it? A Patrice O'Neill joke where he says that, "Oh, white people, don't be so not racist that it gets you into danger." I know it's got nothing to do with race, but it is the same thing that you shouldn't prejudge anybody that you don't know what. It's like, no, you should 100%. If someone's just standing outside there, well, Nala would know anyway. She'd be fuming. But oh, I don't want to be a suburban white person. You are a suburban white person, and you ended up getting killed by that guy that was standing outside. So you should have judged that person. You should have called the police. You should have, but you didn't want to be seen as a judgmental white person. But yeah, yeah. I mean, tragic, tragic. And I honestly thought at one point they was going to say Nick Fuentes was the roommate and he got shot. But bro just went after him after. Yeah, that's why doxing is a low thing because it is always just some nut that will do something. Craziness, craziness. But yeah, when he was saying like there's no link to why there's no link for why anyone would want to shoot anyone over what they believe. But people do want to shoot people for what they believe. We saw it what 3 times with Trump. People don't like other things people believe. That's the link. But yeah, yeah. Let me know your thoughts, sweet.